Kaliningrad is touted as an impregnable fortress of Russia deep in NATO territory. From Washington to Vilnius, Western leaders consider this Russian stronghold the biggest threat in the region. However, even as Moscow further fortifies the region, it is becoming apparent that the feared Russian asset could soon turn out to be a liability. Kaliningrad, home to a major Russian seaport and other key infrastructure, may be on its way to becoming a thorn in Moscow's side as new geopolitical events unravel. Let's take a deep dive and explore the historical significance of the region and how it came to pose an extreme vulnerability to the Kremlin. Starting with the historical background, after World War II, the USSR gained full control over Kaliningrad. Following this, the Soviets strengthened the city during the Cold War and developed it into a closed military zone. Since then, it has been under Moscow's administration and has acted as a key administrative province. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and his successors have wanted to secure this territory for many reasons. First, it has the first warm water port that could be used for the navy and trade. Second, due to its geostrategic significance, it oversees NATO expansion and acts as a counter. Third, it could be used to project power further into Europe and deter any outside aggression. Moreover, it was a big city closer to the USSR and a favorable place to launch any attack on enemies. Later, a new development took shape after the fall of the USSR. In 1991, the Soviet Union fell apart, and many new states emerged. Lithuania and Poland also gained independence and became sovereign states. Due to this development, Kaliningrad was trapped between Lithuania and Poland and acted as a lone exclave. Since then, much of the supply and trade in Kaliningrad have come through the land route between Lithuania and Belarus. While Belarus is a key ally of Russia, Lithuania is the one posing danger for Kaliningrad. As Lithuania joined the European Union in 2004, it was seen as a stark threat to Kaliningrad because the land route goes through it. The situation further worsened after the war between Russia and Ukraine. In June 2022, Lithuania put an embargo on supplies coming from Russia to Kaliningrad after the Russian-Ukraine war. It blocked the imports coming from Russia to Kaliningrad through the rail route. Lithuania did this due to the European Union's fresh sanctions on Russian goods and trade materials. This made things worse between the two neighbors. The Russian Foreign Ministry regarded this act as openly hostile and demanded to restore the embargo immediately. In this perspective, it is relevant to mention the Suwalki Gap and what role does it play in this geographical gap. The Suwalki Gap gained strategic importance after the Baltic states joined NATO. Politico has called it the most dangerous place on earth. It is a small piece of land, about 60 miles between Poland and Lithuania. It means there are hostile states on both sides of NATO because one side is close to Belarus and the other to Russia. It is a choke point for NATO and an upcoming hotspot for the region in the wake of a war. Moreover, it can also be identified as the weakest point for the Western Alliance and the EU. NATO can defend the Baltic states through this tiny sliver piece of land. It becomes clear now that Russia has two strategic advantages, one in the form of Kaliningrad and the other, Suwalki Gap. But beyond military value, the region also holds significance in terms of population and trade. Kaliningrad consists of roughly 1 million people of mostly Russian descent. And just like it did for the USSR, Russia benefits strategically and militarily from Kaliningrad's geographical location. It consists of Russia's only warm water seaport in the Baltic Sea. This seaport is free of ice all year round. The port acts as a commercial hub and is one of the largest industrial centers outside of Russia. Moreover, it is also beneficial for the Baltic states to ensure transportation and trade across the region due to its warm water specialty. Moving on, it is important to know its military significance in a wider geopolitical context. Kaliningrad's primary role is to protect Russian shipments and trade in the region. The most important of all is that Kaliningrad holds the Russian Baltic Fleet. As shocking as it seems, a Russian fleet lies in close proximity to European Union and NATO members. It is home to thousands of Russian troops and a grand military base. In this fleet, Russia has installed nuclear missiles close to the European capitals. Russia has also deployed conventional forces and nuclear Iskander-M ballistic missiles in this exclave. As a matter of fact, Kaliningrad is also home to a strategic air defense system. It has a nuclear bomber airbase, which also serves as a primary airbase for Russia to prevent any air attacks from NATO. It makes sure Moscow remains protected from any possible air threats from enemies. Yes, that's why it holds pivotal importance for Russia to contain a possible NATO incursion into the Kremlin's territory. Russian President Vladimir Putin has consistently held this stance to counter any NATO expansion in its neighboring countries. Regardless of Putin's warning, NATO is expanding its reach to Sweden and Finland. Putin has made it clear to NATO that any offense will not be taken for granted. His message is clear. Some military experts believe that in the wake of any future conflict between Russia and NATO, Kaliningrad could act as its launchpad for the Kremlin's attack on these states. But now the question remains, why, with Kaliningrad seemingly offering so much strategic value to Russia, has it now become its weakest point too? Well, that has to do a lot with the ongoing Russian-Ukraine war. The Kremlin has exhausted itself and its resources on many war fronts. That means it has fewer resources to invest in the security of Fortress Kaliningrad. There is a growing concern that Russia may lose this exclave, be it due to an insurrection or even outright hostile military action, leading to a significant political blow to Moscow, particularly Putin's legitimacy as a leader. For this reason, things may change for Russia in the coming years due to some recent developments in Kaliningrad. There are tensions in Kaliningrad to split away from the Russian sphere of influence. Some separatist movements are on the rise to demand Putin's end in Kaliningrad and switch to the EU. The question is, why would these movements happen to separate from Russian influence, and that too under the guard of the powerful Russian army? The leader of the Baltic Republican Party, Rustam Vasiliev, recently stated that Kaliningrad would secede from Russia and end Russian influence once and for all. Now the question comes into mind that would Kaliningrad be as important to Russia if it separated from Russian influence? The answer is yes, because if it happens, then it would alter the geostrategic position of Kaliningrad for Russia and NATO. As Kaliningrad is sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland, this piece of land would not trouble NATO anymore. Rather, it would act as a bridging channel to fulfill NATO interests in the region. In the larger context, years of Russian threat will be minimized. So Russia is in a lose-lose situation if the separatist movements result in a big shift in Kaliningrad's fate of nationhood. Moreover, this move also makes the Russian Baltic Fleet strategically useless, since Kaliningrad turns out to be a futile asset. It also makes it an expansive liability. With these changes, Russia's attack on any NATO member would always be a risky move. Add to that, if NATO controls the Baltic Sea, they have the ability to fully cut this Russian exclave and halt supply lines. With these changes in mind, Russia almost lacks the strategic motive to defend Kaliningrad in the long term. That seems to be true because Russia has already realized this and started to move critical military supplies out of Kaliningrad. These arms and advanced weapons were shifted to the front lines in Ukraine. Should Russia counter NATO expansion on its borders, it seems these acts were done to plant Russian arms in Ukraine. While the Ukrainian president vows to align with NATO, this potential expansion could halt Russian ambitions in the region. Considering the external pressure and separatist movement on the rise, Russia may soon realize that keeping Kaliningrad is no longer worth the cost. And so the question goes, what would happen after? There is a possibility that it could be a part of Lithuania or Poland, or it could become independent. Or could it remain part of Russia, progressively becoming more expensive to keep, putting a drain on Moscow's coffers? Adding to that, Russia has already exhausted itself in its war in Ukraine. Its defense spending could cripple its economy and strategic assets. If Russia keeps Kaliningrad under its guard, then its cost can also make even mainland Russia vulnerable. Whatever happens in this scenario, Kaliningrad will never be used by Russia to threaten NATO in the foreseeable future. For that reason, it is obvious that Russia has already lost its ability to influence the geopolitical landscape in the region. And the addition of Finland and Sweden to NATO makes things worse for Russia, because it demonstrates the Kremlin's inability to counter NATO expansion. What do you think about Kaliningrad's position to be as strong for Russia as ever? Do you think Kaliningrad will be a liability to Russia in the future? Let us know in the comments section. For more information about such hot topics, check out our next video here and don't forget to subscribe.